You may have heard of the golden rule. And if you haven't, then it's essentially doing unto others. You would have them do unto you, treating others the way you'd want to be treated. But how can we take this concept and apply it to commerce, exchange, and creating a new socioeconomic pattern for the future? Well, we're going to talk about that and more on today's episode of The Culmination. Let's go. So let's talk about a potential new economic system, which I've termed the golden rule economics. Let's explore what would be a necessary foundation for such a system. If you're looking at the concept of the golden rule, which we'll talk about in a second, you would want to be able to have a good foundation of understanding of what the golden rule is. So the golden rule has quite a history in philosophy and religion. The most well-known example is from the Bible, as stated in the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 12, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In the Old Testament, in Leviticus 19:18, we find, love your neighbor as yourself. This is quoted many times and in different ways throughout the Old and New Testaments. There are many earlier versions of this same concept. The earliest versions all seem to appear around the same time, around the 6th century BC. One came from Persian prophet Zarathustra. Whatever is disagreeable to yourself, do not do unto others. And in China, Confucius wrote, what you do not wish for yourself, do not do to others. The philosopher Thales in ancient Greece wrote, avoid doing what you would blame others for doing. But regardless of how it's been phrased, there has been the concept of treating others as you want to be treated in just about every society. In fact, to me, I think it's one of the fundamental rules of being happy is treating others the way that you would want to be treated and not doing things to other people that you wouldn't want done to yourself. And I think that that is a very, very good way to dictate whether you're going to be happy long term, is to be able to implement that concept. So today in civilization, there seems to have drifted quite a distance. There's a little bit of a chasm that's been built, from the concept of this principle to actual implementation. And we find ourselves with a difference of asserting our rightness instead of actually being right. There's a big difference between the concept of being right and asserting your rightness. And actually, this is rooted in following the golden rule. When you're talking to your spouse, there is the concept of being right and then asserting your rightness. I give you an example, is that if you saw that your wife was hungry and you mentioned it and asked the question, are you hungry? Right? And she snapped back at you, right? The right thing to do of being right would just be to get her some food as quickly as possible, and that would solve the problem right away. But now mentioning how she's always hungry and that you need to, and this happens all the time, now you're doing what? You're asserting your rightness. So there's a difference between being right and asserting your rightness. And I think that you can see that being happy would be rooted in actually just being right and not having to assert the fact that you're right. As an example of being right, if you saw someone who was starving, the right thing to do would be to provide them with some food. If the roles were reversed and you were in the position of that starving person, you would undoubtedly wish this treatment for yourself. Whether or not anyone ever knew about it outside of the person you were giving food to, you would feel better about yourself. It would likely set in motion a chain reaction of events that would ultimately wind up with something beneficial happening to you. So it's basically the law of giver's gain. Once you wind up giving something to someone else without expecting something back, you wind up having something is set in motion. And we'll talk about that in a second, right? But you want to be able to put good things into the world and have them come back to you. This is the old tale of doing something early in life that the doer doesn't see the full reward of until decades later. That's basically what the golden rule is all about. Doing something good just for the sake of goodness and not expecting something in return. The golden rule really begins to shine when you do something for someone, whether or not you expect a reciprocal gesture. The act itself is the reward. For example, is someone discussing the injustice to the poor man on the street. The person will assert their rightness about how wrong this treatment is, but they won't do anything about it. These people pontificate about the right decision without actually taking any action. I think that you've all seen this, is the people that are willing to just kind of like go on about, how bad everything is, but they won't actually do anything about it, to make any changes. So which of these people will reap the rewards long term? It'll be the person performing good acts just for the sake of doing them. The person who talks about doing things without taking any action won't be rewarded in any way. There is no altruistic act without action. A person can think about it all they want, but unless they actually do a good thing, nothing has been put into the physical realm, which is where the rubber meets the road. The whole subject of good becomes diluted when people don't actually do anything, but talk a great deal about it. What might be a good way to organize and analyze good acts? Like, what's the paradigm that we're using in order to figure out what is good and bad? What might be a way to organize and analyze good acts? Like, how do we organize and figure out what is good and bad? How do we differentiate that? One way would be to examine the different sectors of life in which one wants to survive well. People want to take care of themselves as individuals. They want to be healthy. They want to be in good shape. They want to have a good family and a decent family life. They desire to have an excellent working life or time in school. They wish to help humanity in some way. They probably want to see that nature and environment are cared for. These are the primary driving forces for people taking action or withholding destructive action. The judgment being whether or not an act adds to or detracts from survival in these basic areas of existence. Is this taking away or adding to our overall survival, capacity to survive, and our existence and our happiness? How might we define good? Anything that would increase the survival capacity in most of these sectors would be considered good. Anything that would diminish the majority would be bad. Confusion can arise when good and bad collapse, meaning that you become confused as to which one is which. For example, embezzling $20 million would be considered bad by those from whom it was embezzled. But for the person who committed the act of embezzlement, does the act increase their capacity to survive? Does it increase their ability to be able to continue their existence? In very straight black and white, if all the embezzler sees is I was at $0 and now I have $20 million, then embezzling is a good thing from their perspective. The person has some freedom, some cash in their pocket, and can feed, clothe, and house their family. If stealing it from others doesn't play a part in the equation, it doesn't matter to them. The fact of the matter is, though, whether one believes it or not, the scales will balance. This observation can always be made regardless of religion. In Eastern philosophies, it's considered was something called the circle of life, right? And what it says here is that the circle of life completes when you send something good into the world and something good comes back to you. If you send something bad into the world, something bad will come back to you. The scales are always balanced one way or another. Sometimes it may take many years for the scales to balance. While this podcast, is not intended as a dissertation on existentialism or the spiritual nature of humankind, if one considers that a person only has a single life for the scales to balance, the balancing scales principle doesn't make much sense. Because in some cases, you could have a life that is so terrible, where you hurt others so much that at what point do the scales balance? Like, does that just end the cycle? I don't think so. This is why I feel that the concept of living many lives begins to explain concepts such as brutal levels of poverty or people battling tremendous adversity from birth onward. Who is to say that the scales aren't balancing back in the other direction for them? This is something that I've thought about. And again, I'm not trying to, make a statement on religion or spirituality. But one of the things I've thought about, and this is a question that I ask, and I've asked people when I'm talking to them philosophically, is if you're going someplace else after we die, right, whether it's heaven or paradise or whatever you want to call it, where you're going, are you going to have the same physical form? Probably not. So doesn't it stand to reason that if you are going someplace and are not going to have the same physical form, then doesn't it stand to reason that you could have come from someplace also without the same physical form. Anyway, just one of those things that I've kind of thought about over the years. And so I think that the scales are constantly balancing one way or another. And if you believe that, then this means that, you carry with you into the next life whatever you are doing now, which, by the way, that makes you really stop and think about, doing bad things in the current life. Is if you take that with you and the scales are going to balance back, then, you would think twice about doing bad things. There's a concept that we've probably all heard of or talked about where it's like, live every day as if it were your last. Well, to be honest with you, if you really put yourself in that position where you live every day as if it were going to be your last, most people would probably, do a bunch of bad things because they knew that they wouldn't have any accountability or consequences, or, they might just spend time with their family, on their last day on earth, and either one of those two things is kind of sad, but the way I look at it is that if you really want to live a great life, is that you have to live every day as if you are going to be here forever, because then that will dictate what the actions that you take today, what you'll inherit from those actions tomorrow. So someone philosophically approaching life from this view would be trying to chalk up as many good deeds as possible to push the scales in their favor. I think good deeds done for their own sake are indeed kept on the karmic scoreboard, whether one believes it or not. I've also observed that people who don't believe that the scales balance tend to be unhappier and more self-centered than those who believe in that balancing or in a higher power and higher law. It is factually true that people who believe in God are generally happier than those who do not, regardless of what those people tell you. It's funny, I have some friends that they're atheists, and I, typically speaking, I don't find that existence would make me happy. I don't find that when the lights go out, that's over, that, we go back to being dirt and there's no further existence. To me, I just go, what's the point? And if that is the way, if you've ever had that thought, well, what's the point? Then I don't see that not believing in a higher power or spirituality or believing in God, I don't see that it serves you to not believe in those things. So by just observing the desire for self-preservation and the preservation of these different facets of life, meaning as an individual, as a family, within your own groups, as a species, mankind, and all living things, and the greater universe, and the spirituality of man, and God, right? All these different facets of life, a person could easily end up saying, I should probably do some good things. So all of these concepts are I've laid out here is to give a foundation, a little bit of a paradigm, an example of exactly what is the foundation that's necessary in order to explore the concept of golden rule economics. Until we understand, a difference between good and bad, and we have a long-term point of view of all of these pieces of the puzzle, how they all fit together, thus creating a good life, I think it's very, very difficult to convert that into sort of a socioeconomic system that would be able to make any sense. So now we understand what the golden rule is, what some of the roots are, how to evaluate good and bad. Let's talk about, we're going to talk about in the next episode, exactly how, this can be utilized in creating, commerce and exchange that would be beneficial and create new systems that I think would wind up being beneficial to everybody. And by the way, some of this may be a little bit redundant and have taken many things from other areas, but I will tell you this, that's the whole point of the human endeavor is synthesis of ideas. It's taking lots of ideas and being able to figure out what's the next evolution and hopefully adding to that. And that's where I think that we make our mark. So we'll explore that a little bit in the next episode. So if you've liked this episode, make sure that you hit the like button, make sure that you share it with others, make sure that you turn on notifications so that when the next episode comes out, you'll be the first one to be able to get notified. But also leave a comment, leave a comment as to what you think about, some of these concepts so far. Your own, what I'd love to hear is, what are your own thoughts and your own personal evolution of how you have sort of grown as a person to understand, the golden rule as it applies to yourself and your own existence. So looking forward to it. Thanks for tuning in on this episode of the Coleman Nation.